2 videos ago, we made 2 test cases to verify that utils.add and our utils square method work as expected. And we did that using an if condition. If the value was not 44, that means something went wrong, and we threw an error. In this video, we're going to learn how to use an assertion library, which is going to take care of all of this code for us. Because as you'll see, when we add more and more tests, the code is going to end up looking pretty similar, and there's no reason to keep rewriting it. Assertion libraries let us make assertions about values, whether it's about their type, the value itself, whether an array contains an element, all sorts of things like that. They really are fantastic. The one we're going to be using is called expect. You can find it by going to Google and Googling mjackson expect. And this is the result we're looking for. It's mjackson's repository expect. It is a fantastic and super popular assertion library. This library is going to let us pass in a value and make some assertions about it. If you scroll down past the introduction and the installation, we'll talk about those later, we can get down to an example. Right here, we have our assertions header, and we have our first assertion, to exist. This is going to verify that a value exists. Down below, we have an example. We pass in a string to expect. This is the value we want to make some assertions about. In the context of our application, that would be the response variable right here. We want to assert that it is equal to 44. After we call expect, we can start chaining on some assertion calls. Right here, we check if it does exist. This would not throw an error because a string is indeed truthy inside of JavaScript. If we passed in something like undefined, which is not truthy, to exist would fail. It would throw an error and the test case would not pass. Using these assertions, we can make it really easy to check the values in our tests without having to write all of that code ourselves. Let's go ahead and start exploring it. First up, I am going to install it inside of the terminal by running npm install. The module name itself is called expect, and we're going to grab the most recent version at 1.20.2. Andrew here from the future with a very important update. The expect library has been donated to a different organization, and the latest version, which is v21.1.0, is not backwards compatible with the version used here, 1.20.2. So here's how we're going to work around that. What I'd like you to do is install the version in the video, that is 1.20.2. That's going to make sure you can go through the next several videos, and I promise a little bit later in the course, I will have an upgrade video, which I'm going to be filming in just a few minutes. This upgrade video is going to show you how you can upgrade from expect 1.20.2 to the latest version, which would be v21. It is going to be important though that you do stick with this expect version for now, 1.20.2. If you don't, you are going to run into issues. Don't worry though, I will get you upgraded to the latest a little bit later in the course. So let's go ahead and jump back into the video, and I'll see you in a few sections when we upgrade to the latest version. And once again, we'll be using the save dev flag like we did with Mocha, because we do indeed want to save this dependency in package.json, but it's a dev dependency. It's not required for the application to run, whether it's on Heroku or some other service. I'm going to go ahead and install this dependency. Then we can move over to the application, check out package.json, and it looks great. We have expect and we have Mocha. Now, inside of our utils test file, we can kick things off by loading in the library and making our first assertions using expect. Up at the very top of the file, I'm going to load in the library, creating a constant called expect and requiring it. Require, expect, just like this. Now, down below, we can get started by swapping out this code with a call to expect instead. Now, as you saw over in the example, we're going to start all of our assertions by calling expect as a function, passing in the value we want to make assertions about. In this case, that is the result variable. Now we can assert all sorts of things. In this case, we want to assert that the value is equal to 44. I'm going to go over to the documentation just to get you comfortable looking around. And this is one of those pieces of documentation you're going to come back to more so than anything else. Most apps, I use the same methods and I have them memorized, but with expect, there's so many assertions and they're so useful, I find myself with this tab open quite a bit. What we're going to use to make our assertion is to_be. This asserts that a value equals another value, and that's exactly what we want. We assert that our value passed into expect equals another value using 2b, passing that value in as the first argument. Back inside of Atom, we can go ahead and use this assertion. Dot 2b. And we're expecting the result variable to be the number 44, just like this. Awesome. Now we have our test case, and it should work exactly as it did down below. To prove it does work, I'm going to move into the terminal and use clear to clear the terminal output. And now we can run that test watch script using npm run test-watch, just like this. I'm going to kick it off, and right here we get our two tests passing just like they did before. Now, if I were to change 44 to some other value that would throw an error like 40, and I save the file, we are going to get an error, and the expect library is going to generate useful error messages for us. It's saying that we expected 44 to be 40. Clearly, that's not the case, so an error gets thrown. I'm going to change this back to 44, save the file, and all of our tests will pass. Excellent. Now, we can also chain together multiple assertions. For example, we could assert that the value that comes back from add is a number. This can be done using another assertion. So let's head into the docs and take a look. Inside of Chrome, we're going to scroll down through the docs list. There's a lot of methods. We'll be exploring some of them. We're looking for this one, 2ba, the method that takes a string. This takes the string type, and it uses the type of operator to assert that the value is of a certain type. Here, we're expecting 2 to be a number. We can do that exact same thing over in our code. Inside of Atom, right after 2b, we can chain on another call, 2ba, followed by the type. This could be something like string. It could be something like object. Or in our case, it could be number, just like this. I'm going to open up the terminal so we can see the result. It's currently hidden. Save the file. Our tests are going to rerun, and we can see they're both passing. If I were to use a different type, something that was going to cause the test to fail, we would get an error message like this. Expected 44 to be a string. This is really useful. It's going to help us clean up our errors really quickly. I'm going to change this back to number, and we are good to go. Now I'd like you to do the same thing for our tests down below. I want you to use expect to assert that the response is indeed the number 9 and that the type is a number. You're going to use the same two assertions we do up above. Go ahead and swap this code out for calls to expect, make those assertions, save the file, and make sure both tests are still passing. Pause the video, knock that out, and when you're done, click play. All right. All you needed to do to get that done is first up delete the current code, since we're not going to be using that anymore. Throughout the rest of the course, we will never again be throwing errors manually inside of our tests. Instead, we'll be using assertion libraries. Right here, we're going to make some expectations about the result variable. First up, we're going to expect it to be the number 9, just like this. I'm going to save the file and make sure the test passes, and it does indeed pass. Now, we're also going to assert the type using 2ba. Here, we're checking that the type of the return value from the square method is a number. And when I save the file, we get both of our tests still passing, which is fantastic. Now, this is just a small taste as to what expect can do. Let's go ahead and create a bogus test case that is going to explore a few more ways we can use expect. We're not going to be testing an actual function. We'll just play around with some assertions inside of the it callback. I'm going to make a new test using it. It should expect some values. You can put whatever you want in here. It's not too important. And we're going to pass in an arrow function as our callback function. Excellent. Now, as we've seen already, one of the most fundamental assertions you're going to make is you're just going to check for equality. I want to check if something like the response variable equals something else, like the number 44. Inside of expect, we can also do the opposite. We can expect that a value like 12 does not equal using 2, not b, and then we can assert that it doesn't equal some other value, like 11. The two aren't equal, so when I save the file over in the terminal, all three tests should be passing. If I set them equal to the same value, it's not going to work as expected. We're going to get an error, expected 12 to not be 12. Now, to be and not to be work great for numbers, strings, and booleans, but if you're trying to compare arrays or objects, they are not going to work as expected, and we can prove this. I'm going to remove the current code by commenting it out. I'll leave it around so we have it for later. I'm going to expect an object with the name property set to Andrew with an uppercase A to be dot to be. And I'm going to assert that it is another object where the name property is equal to Andrew, just like this. To not be is going to work great for numbers, strings, and booleans, but it's not going to work for objects. And we can prove this. I'm going to comment out the current call, and we're going to replace it with an expectation that an object where the name property equals Andrew equals another object that looks exactly the same. We're going to use to be, just like we did up above, checking if it is the same as another object where name equals Andrew. Awesome. Now, when I go ahead and save this, you might think the test is going to pass, but it's not. Right here, we see that we expected these two to be equal. When objects are compared for equality using the triple equals, which is what to be uses, they're not going to be the same because it's trying to see if they're the exact same object, and they're not. We've created two separate objects with the same properties. To check if these two are equal, we're going to have to use something different. It's called to equal. If I save my file, this is going to work. It's going to rip into the object properties, making sure they have the same ones. The same thing goes for to not equal. This checks if two objects are not equal. I'm going to go ahead and change the first object to have a lowercase a in Andrew, and the test passes. They are not equal. This is how we do equality with our objects and arrays. Now, another really useful thing we have is to include. This checks if an array or an object includes some things. Now, if it's an array, we can check if it includes a certain item in the array. If it's an object, we can check if it includes certain properties. Let's go ahead and run through an example of that. Right here, we're going to expect that an array with the numbers 2, 3, and 4 inside of it has inside of it the number 5. And we can do that using to include. To include takes the item. In this case, we're going to check if the array has 5 inside. Now, clearly it doesn't, so this test is going to fail. We get the message we expected 2, 3, 4 to include 5. That does not exist. If we change this to a number that does exist, like 2, we're going to rerun the test suite and everything is going to work as expected. Now, along with to include, we have to exclude, like this. This is going to check if something does not exist, like the number 1, which is not in the array. If I run this assertion, the test passes. The same two methods, to include and to exclude, work with objects as well. We can play with that right on the next line. I'm going to expect that the following object has something on it. Let's go ahead and create an object that has a name property. Go ahead and set it equal to your first name. We'll also make an age property. I'm going to set that equal to my age, and we'll set a location property. I'm going to set that equal to my location. Now, let's say we want to make some assertions about particular properties, not necessarily the entire object. We can use to include to assert that the object has some properties and that those property values equals the value we pass in. For example, the age. Let's say we only care about the age. We can assert that the object has an age property equal to 25 by typing this code. It doesn't matter that there's a name property. The name property could be any value that is irrelevant in this assertion. Now, if the value is not correct, like it's 23, this test is going to fail. We expected the age property to be 23, but it was indeed 25, so the test fails. Same thing goes with to exclude. To exclude. Here we can save our test files. This checks if the object does not have a property age equal to 23. It does indeed not have that, so the test passes. This is just a quick taste as to what expect can do. For a full list of features, I recommend diving through the documentation. There's a ton of other assertions you can use, things like checking if a number is greater than another number, if a number is less than or equal to another number. All sorts of math-related operations are included as well. And now let's go ahead and wrap things up with a challenge that requires you to use some of this knowledge. Over in utils.js, we can make a new function, one that you'll be testing, module.exports.set name. Set name is going to take two arguments. It's going to take a user object, some fictitious user object with some generic properties, and it's going to take a full name as a string. The job of set name is going to be to rip apart full name into two parts, the first name and the last name, by splitting it on the space. We're going to go ahead and set the two properties, first name and last name, and return the user object. We'll fill out the function together. You're going to be responsible for writing the test case. The first thing we're going to do is split the name into a names array. Var names is going to be that array. It'll have two values, assuming there's only one space inside of the name. For now, that's the assumption. We're assuming someone types their first name, space, their last name. I know that doesn't work with every single name, but it'll get us by for now. I'm going to go ahead and set this equal to full name dot split, and we're going to split on the space. So I'm going to pass in an empty string with a space inside of it as the value to split. Now we have a names array where the first item is the first name and the last item is the last name. So we can start updating the user object. User dot first name is going to equal the first item in the names array, names array, and we're going to grab the index of 0, which is the first item, and we'll do something similar for last name. User dot last name equals the second item from the names array. Now we're all done. We have the names set, and we can go ahead and return the user object using return user, just like this. I forgot my equal sign. I'm going to go ahead and add that right here. Awesome. Over inside of the utils test file, we can now kick things off. I'm going to leave a comment for what I'd like you to do. I'm going to comment out our it should expect some values handler. This is pretty great for documentation. You can always explore it later if you forget how things work, but for now it's not necessary. We're going to create a new test that should verify first and last names are set. Awesome. You're going to be responsible for creating a user object. On that user object, I want you to set some properties like age and location. Then you're going to pass that variable user into the set name method. That's going to be the first argument defined right here. You're also going to pass in a string, the string with your first name followed by a space followed by your last name. Then you're going to go ahead and get the result back and you're going to make some assertions about it. I want you to assert that the returning object includes, using toInclude, assert it includes first name and last name with proper values. So if I pass in as my full name, Andrew space Mead, I would expect the first name to be Andrew and the last name to be Mead. So pause the video, play around with this one, make the test case, make the user object, call the function, and make our assertion using toInclude. I also want you to verify that the type is indeed an object using toBA. How'd you do? Hopefully you were able to get that done. If you ran into any problems, that is perfectly fine. You're really new to testing. We just made our third test, so it's okay if things did not go as planned. Right here, I'm going to call it to make the new test case. We're going to be testing it should set first name and last name. Inside of here, we can now provide our second argument, which is going to be our callback function. I'm going to set that to an arrow function, and now we can make that user object I talked about. The user object is going to have a few properties. I'm going to add something like location, setting that equal to Philadelphia, and I'll set an age property, setting that equal to 25. Now we can go ahead and call the method we defined over in utils.js set name. I'm going to do that on the next line, creating a variable called response to store the response. Then I'll set that equal to utils.setName, passing in the two arguments, the user object and the full name. Right here, I'll provide Andrew space Mead. Now at this point, the result should be what we expect. We should have that first name and last name property. We should have the location property, and we should have the age property. Now, if you know a lot about JavaScript, you might know that objects are passed by reference, so the user variable has actually been updated as well. That is expected. Both user and response are going to have the exact same value. We can actually go ahead and prove that using an assertion. We're going to expect that user equals using toEqual the response. Now, this was not necessary for the challenge. I'm going to be deleting this line in just a moment, but over here you can see the test does indeed pass. What I wanted you to do is check that the user object or the response object includes certain properties. I'm going to check using expect, that the result variable has some properties using toInclude. The properties I'm looking for are a first name equal to what I would expect that to be, Andrew, and a last name equal to Mead. Excellent. These are the assertions that should be made in order to verify that setName is working as expected. If I save the file, the test suite reruns, and we do indeed get the passing tests. We have 3 of them, and it took just 10 milliseconds to run. And with this in place, we now have an assertion library for our test suite. And that's fantastic, because writing test cases just got way easier. And the whole goal of this section is to make testing approachable and easy. If testing is hard and painful, you're not going to do it. And I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't be testing either. Hopefully by now, though, you're seeing that it doesn't need to be difficult. It can be pretty awesome. In the next video, we're going to start looking at how we can test more complex asynchronous functions. That's coming up next, so stay tuned. I will see you then.